Now, we're going to take a look, this session has really been called the Great Energy Debate. And when you look at shale gas and renewables, really the two major forces that right now are shaping the energy landscape. So we want to examine the relationship in detail in this next session, really take a look at what is going on. And again, we're going to have a very detailed presentation first, and then we're going to have an on-stage interview. So it's a bit of a different presentation on this, but one I hope you'll enjoy and we'll be able to hear from you later. So looking at gas and renewables, are they partners or adversaries? So have a think about that while we're looking at this too. And the lady who's going to present this is a woman who has worked in the corporate energy world really all her career. She has a very deep understanding of the complex issues facing the energy sector today. She's the Executive Vice President of Corporate Affairs and the Secretary General of Hydro-Quebec in Canada, obviously, and as well as that, she sits on the UN board, the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's Advisory Board on Sustainable Energy for All. I mean, they're just some of the things she does, and she is a very accomplished woman and works tirelessly in terms of promoting this agenda. I think our seats are almost ready here, and it's my cue to get you set up. Again, forgive us, our furniture removal is going right across the stage, I see right now. Sorry about that one. Our backstage department isn't working as well as it could be today. But so as I say, we're going to take a look at this great energy debate, and we will first of all have our presentation by our speaker, and then followed that we will have an interview on board, and I'll quickly introduce you then. We'll be joined in just a few minutes then afterwards. So please, to get this great energy debate started, a very warm welcome please for the chair of the World Energy Council, Marie-José Nadu.
Thank you very much, Agni, for this kind introduction, and good morning all. Actually, it's still morning, so I can say good morning. It's a real pleasure for me to be here today. I've been in Abu Dhabi on several occasions, and every time I visit, I'm amazed by the vitality of the country, grounded in its heritage, driven by knowledgeable and innovative leaders, and we all look for that, united in the vision to develop a sustainable environment. For the benefit of those who do not know the World Energy Council, let me just start by giving you a brief overview of the organization I am privileged to chair. Formed in 1923, WEC is the UN-accredited global energy body representing the entire energy spectrum, with more than 3,000 member organizations located in 95 countries and drawn from governments, private and state corporations, academia, NGOs, and energy-related stakeholders. We see ourselves as the principal impartial network of leaders and practitioners promoting an affordable, stable, and environmentally sensitive energy system. WEC informs global, regional, and national energy strategies by hosting high-level events, publishing authoritative studies, and working through its extensive member network to facilitate the world's energy policy dialogue. Our next Congress in 2016 will be in Istanbul, and I take pride in saying that it will be followed by Abu Dhabi in 2019. So, does the world's energy future hinge on gas, or on renewables, or on both? Well, WEC's mission is not to recommend particular energy sources. We believe, and we strongly believe, that each country or society has to make its own choices when it comes to designing an effective energy policy. What WEC does is to provide a framework that is designed to help energy policymakers make the right choices for their country and for the planet as a whole. We believe that when designing an energy policy, policymakers need to bear in mind three key factors. First, the need to provide affordable energy supplies for their populations. Second, the need to ensure that these supplies are stable and secure, so that these policies allow for stable and secure supply. And finally, that they should seek to minimize the impact of energy production and use on the environment. At WEC, we call this the energy trilemma. Each year, WEC publishes the World Energy Trilemma Report and Index, in which we make wide-ranging recommendations to support policymakers. The index rates 129 participating countries according to their ability to achieve a trade-off between energy access, energy security, and environmental mitigation. It also ranks the countries' energy policies. Let's take the UAE as an example. The UAE moved from position 53 in 2012 to 44 in 2013 to 35 in 2014, 35 out of 129 participating countries. The scoring recognizes how the country is addressing the energy trilemma, making major investments across the energy spectrum to improve its energy mix and its environmental sustainability. In this regard, worth noting are the construction of a 5.4 gigawatt nuclear power plant managed under one of the most internationally transparent programs to date and on schedule to deliver the first reactor in 2017 and the last in 2020. The establishment of renewable energy targets, including 7% generation capacity in Abu Dhabi by 2020 and 5% consumption in Dubai by 2030, that will be met by solar, wind, and waste-to-energy. The establishment of a 30% demand reduction target by 2030 in the Emirate of Dubai, achieved through a mix of pricing reform, performance codes, and efficiency investments. And finally, the development of a commercial-scale CCUS project, one of the few in the world. This project is developed by Masdar and ADNOC using steel production emissions. CO2 will be pumped from the plant, compressed, and transported 50 kilometers away to oil fields operated by ADNOC before it's injected to boost oil production in the field. The project is expected to start in 2016 and will sequester up to 800,000 tons of CO2 annually, and I will say that it follows a clearly conclusive demonstration project. Obviously, each country has to choose its own energy mix. WEC would say that an optimum mix would be one that delivers cheap and plentiful supplies that are as clean as possible. Of course, in the real world, countries have to make difficult choices. A developing country such as India, and Sir David Kim showed you the graphs just before I came up on stage, well, a country like India may well be tempted to burn coal to provide energy for a growing economy and to supply families who currently have no access to any form of modern energy. While a country like my own, Canada, can benefit from plentiful supplies of hydropower to supply consumers with affordable and clean energy while, at the same time, exporting oil and gas to the US. The vastly differing realities of such countries as India and Canada go a long way to explain just why it's so difficult to achieve a global agreement on climate change. However, there's an urgent need to come to an agreement, and according to WEC's world energy scenarios, even in the best case, we will see a near doubling of global greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, compared to where we should be in 2050 to meet the 450 parts per million CO2 reference. At worst, GHG emissions could increase by over fourfold. WEC recognizes that energy production and use is the biggest single contributor to climate change, and that is why the energy sector needs to stand up and take center stage in the debate. Simply put, without the active involvement of the energy sector, there cannot be a definitive agreement at COP21 in Paris next year. The energy industry is fully on board with this process and needs clarity and predictability on climate change policies. When we survey our stakeholders, climate framework is perceived as one of the most critical uncertainties facing us. Incidentally, today we're launching the 7th edition of our World Energy Issues Monitor. This year, the report has gathered the views from more than 1,000 energy leaders worldwide, including ministers and chief executives from nearly 80 countries. Globally, energy leaders see energy prices volatility and the future of a climate framework as their top critical uncertainty. The report shows that energy leaders believe that the emissions agreement between China and the US, announced last November, has increased the pressure on other large emitters whose stance and approach to cutting emissions still pose a large question mark for investors. North America and other OECD countries believe that a climate framework will strongly impact on their energy sector, reflecting the historic and expected commitment to legally binding climate targets. By contrast, while African leaders see climate change as their top concern, they are more worried about the physical impacts of climate change, such as extreme weather events, rather than in the complex negotiations of a climate framework. For the Middle East and North Africa region, concerns about the future of coal and LNG have risen in terms of both uncertainty and impact. Coal has become a concern as it is a fuel competitive with hydrocarbons produced in the region, while the region's LNG exports are facing competition not only from coal, but also from the prospect of increasing production in Australia and East Africa, not to mention the USA with the unconventional gas and oil. Energy leaders in the region are also concerned not only by the impact of climate change on their businesses, but also the impact of energy production on their fragile environments. The region's increasing uptake of renewables, as we see in countries such as here in the UAE, shows that alternative energy and conventional fossil fuels are not mutually exclusive. The Middle East is providing excellent examples of how innovation and resource diversification help countries meet the challenge of the energy trilemma. So, addressing the specific question on gas and renewables, are they partners or opponents? Well, both are clean and plentiful and clearly go hand in hand. Solar and wind are intermittent, so they are truly useful only if the power they produce can be stored, as was eloquently demonstrated by Sir David King. Otherwise, they need backup capacity, typically from fossil fuel sources. So in that context, gas is the cleanest option. Hence my conclusion. With gas able to provide base load energy for intermittent renewable sources, such as solar and wind, both go hand in hand. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the interview and maybe the question period.
Super. Mayor Jose, thank you so much, please, and if you can just join us here. And as I said, we're absolutely thrilled now that we're doing something a little bit different with this session. I'm not asking any questions on this one, which is wonderful, but we have a lady who has okay. Sorry, the lady who has just joined me here on the stage is going to do this interview. And we're absolutely thrilled. It's a real honor for us here to actually have her to come and take the time to do this interview. She is an internationally recognized environmental lawyer. She is also a very accomplished author, a climate change and development policy expert. She has been working for many, many years in this field. She's a lady who has spent the last 20 years particularly advising leaders and developing countries on energy matters and economic development. So we have two heavy hitters here on the stage. So joining Marie-José, please give a very warm welcome to the founder and the Chief Executive Officer of Track Zero, and she is also Professor of Law at the University College London, Farhana Yamin.
To adjust the seating a little bit to make sure that we could see each other in this debate style. It's a debate that we're trying to do so that all the questions that were raised at the introduction by Ethne are answered, which is very hard to do in 30 minutes. So we have found that the debate format, where I'll try and ask some of the questions that I think you would have liked to have asked, will help have that. So thank you very much, Marie-José, for your excellent presentation. Scenarios don't usually pan out in the way that they were constructed, and no one seems to have predicted the falling oil prices in the last 6 months. So I was wondering if we could have some of your thoughts about what is going to be the fallout of oil prices that have halved in the last 6 months, how long that will stay, how does that change the equation between oil, gas, shale, fracking, and renewables?
Farhana, this is not $1 million question, it's $1 billion question. Many elements to my question. The first is that scenarios, as we build them at WEC, are not normative. So we collect data from our member committees, countries, research, through an extensive analysis. We divide the scenarios in two scenarios. One would be an approach where countries are left with no intervention from the state in terms of climate policies, and that it's a bottom-up approach from industry. We call this scenario JAZZ. And the second one is Symphony, because it calls for a global framework, internationally agreed, transferred through various mechanisms, binding mechanisms in countries. And we see, so this is why it's not a scenario to predict an outcome. It's a scenario that says if you do this that way, or if you do it differently, you'll have different perspectives on what is bound to happen. Now, your question as to what will happen with oil and the price of oil, you know, experienced people and leaders in this room and policymakers, I'm sure, have enough experience to know that the price of oil has evolved over time. It's never been stable and fixed over 10, 15, 20 years period. It's a cyclic phenomenon. And we are experiencing now, as we speak, a reset. The industry responds to a series of criteria, be they economic, be they geopolitical. In this case, what we see is the economic downturn, with notably in China, notably in Europe, with an output of oil coming out of the United States with tight oil. So overproduction, less demand, oversupply, less demand. This should have been predictable. Now, how long is it going to occur? When will we hit the bottom? When will we start to recover? To what level will it? At what level will it reach its optimum price? That we don't know. As you know, probably many here can have their own predictions. But there is a consensus that it will last at least for a good part of the year of 2015 and recover sometime in 2016, early in 2016, and not necessarily, when I say recover, to the price it was before its fall down. So that's to the price of crude. Now, what will be the impact on renewables? What will be the impact on other sources of energy? Renewables provide electricity. Electricity comes generally, most exclusively, when referring to fossil fuels, from gas. So we will see, we're quite sure, an impact on gas produced in the States, because as this reset in the price of crude is happening, there will be less production of tight oil in the States, with the impact of gas, because it calls from the same technology, hydraulic fracturing. There's also the question of shipping the gas and of pipelines. So we could see an increase of the price of gas in the States, but it could be on the long run, 2 years. I mean, it's not going to happen anyhow in the short time. Renewables are pushed by other factors. Renewables are pushed by the determination of countries, pushed by their own populations to address the climate change issue. So they have a rationale of their own. They're also pushed by the fact that, as was put in evidence by Sir David King, the costs have fallen. So they have become more and more competitive. They are helping in securing a better environment. They are part of sustainable energy. And the next challenge will have to be addressed is the challenge of storage. And that brought me back to the question of gas earlier.
Well, thank you for that. It seems in the short term, gas has been seen as a transition fuel to the clean economy powered by renewables, with the added research that may come and smart grids and storage that would be needed, but very different kind of infrastructure that's needed to support that being the dominant mode of our energy usage. So I'll leave that for now, because I know that people also want to ask you about the Paris Agreement. Sir David King, for those of you who are here, highlighted that the IPCC's report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which concluded this year its 5-year cycle, has said that we need zero emissions, and actually net negative emissions. We need to suck out emissions from the ground, from the atmosphere, possibly. So negative or zero emissions not later than 2100, with many scientists actually saying that the 0 point, if you really want to be certain that you're going to stay below this 2-degree threshold, should be around 2050. So many of the scenarios, again, that you have, how far do they consider taking that into account? How far are the analysts, the investments, and the investors and the policymakers in the energy world recognizing that the science is setting a very clear direction? And governments at Lima, where I was a couple of weeks ago, seem to be following. Around 100 countries now want to look at the idea of a long-term goal, a phase-out. So is your industry, is the energy industry and the stakeholders that you talk to thinking about a phase-out on the IPCC science-driven timeframes?
Well, the first part of my answer to your question or to your comment is that it's clear that if we maintain the current path, we will not be on track to meet the 450 ppm threshold. Now, as I said earlier, the scenarios do not provide the solution. They provide the outcome of policies put in place or not put in place. When we look at our scenarios, it's clear that the scenario symphony calling for a climate framework, putting in place a climate framework, goes a long way protecting the environment and facilitating the goals that we've set for ourselves as a society. What will happen in Paris, we'll see. I think that we can all agree, I hope we can all agree, that Paris will give us not only because we have the common understanding of what has to be done from Lima. We have to move to the next step, an agreement, an international agreed treaty on climate change. WEC certainly favors this. Practically speaking, is it going to be what we thought it would be in Kyoto, a treaty, a binding treaty with a cap and trade system internationally detailed? We don't see it that way. We see an agreement, and we see that more will have to be done to deploy the impacts of the agreement. We will have to address the price of CO2 at the global level. There is no other way around, and this will facilitate the renewables, the deployment of renewables. So Paris, we all believe, and the work is still going on, is promising, but it will be followed by other major breakthroughs.
Definitely, for sure. I mean, certainly the preparations for Paris are on track much better than we were for Copenhagen, where the targets that countries committed to for 2020 were announced more or less on the last night of the conference as some of the leaders had to go home. I was there in that chaos. So certainly this time round, all countries are being asked to bring forward their commitments, their targets for 2030, 2025 to 2030 ahead, and that process will start this year. Most of the major blocs, the US, China, the EU, have already announced the range that they're willing to put forward at the international level, and it'd be great to have that understanding that they have to add up. Whilst national choices determine the energy mix, globally, if we're to keep within the 2-degree limit, the work of WEC and other bodies that work with countries needs to support the fact that they have to also be in this trajectory and be within this range. And I wondered if your work in the future will take the zero scenarios that Sir David pointed out are necessary, that the IPCC pointed out are necessary, into account.
Well, we'll certainly look into it. We cannot afford not to look into various options, but we wouldn't want to take such an option as a zero-based scenario that would have the impact of predicting the outcome, or would have a major consequence on the outcome, because we're not looking to influence the outcome. We want to be as fact-based as possible and give the outcome depending on what policies will be developed, at what rhythm they will be deployed. What will be the policymakers' decisions in terms of frameworks at the regional and country level? And from those data, we deploy the two scenarios. So, I mean, we'll see what, in terms of your question, what the zero-based scenario gives, and we'll look at it. And maybe next year I'll have an answer for you.
Well, one of the things that colleagues of mine at UCL have recently produced another study looking at the issue of stranded assets, assets that may in fact be toxic depending on the financial landscape, on the policy landscape that the future energy industry peers into. And I wondered if you had thoughts and comments about that body of work, which seems to be getting a lot of traction in policy circles. The UK Treasury has said that it will now look at the issue of stranded assets and the risks financially to investments, pension holders and so forth, about whether those assets that used to be considered blue chip are really as strong as they ought to be. And I wondered whether you had thoughts about that body of work and what it really means and how we should see it.
We're looking into it as we speak, because as you mentioned, it's a fairly recent piece of work. But what it says is that, and stranded assets seem to be developing, the United States are threatened with that possibility. So the states with distributed generation, Europe, but it's not everywhere in the world. So we have to be cautious, because at WEC we look at it globally. That being said, it does demonstrate how complex the energy world is, at what speed things are changing also, and how institutions such as ours can help understand the debate and keep the dialogue open, because this is a fairly recent concept.
Yeah. Well, there are always fallouts in markets. You know, no industry survives forever, and there are always changes in mix between countries' share of a market for a particular product, and no product survives forever. So the issue is really very much about the orientation of businesses in the future. Where will they go? Where do they likely see and read the tea leaves in advance of Paris, with the oil price being what they are, and whether, in fact, renewables gives you the benefit of certainty of price and the fact that it's only going in one direction, which is very much downwards.
As long as it is coupled with another source, unless we find a solution to storage. But to get to your point, one thing is sure, is that we can no longer do business as usual. We are all put before facts and changes in the industry that will lead us to decisions that will be difficult to make. And policymakers and industry leaders very well know that, keeping in mind that we need access to energy, we need reliable energy, and we want to be in the safest way, environmentally speaking.
Excellent. Well, you have a tough job understanding your industry, working with your industry, doing analysis and independent assessments, and you've been very cautious in the way in which you can, you're not putting yourself forward as somebody who knows the future and is saying, here is where it's going to go. So let me ask you, if you had a magic wand, Marie-Josée, what three wishes would you use to fix the problems of the energy sector as you see them?
That's another billion-dollar question. Well, surely I would stress on energy efficiency. We haven't talked about energy efficiency. This was not the topic, but it is important and it is promising, and we are not doing enough. I would certainly address the price of CO2. Addressing the price of CO2 would allow would give a break to renewables also. And my third, I guess, priority would be to invest in R&D, because we cannot afford to ignore the storage challenges that we are facing, and we need investments in technology, and we need breakthroughs in technology. And if one thing is not bad or good, is that we could probably take advantage of the flexibility we now have with the price of oil, with a reduction in subsidies and a move to investments supporting R&D.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one question. So there's...
We have one here, Hannah.
Thank you, Edna.
Anxious to talk to you. Sir, let us know who you are.
Ronald Steblick from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The topic of this session is gas and renewables, partners or adversaries. In a lot of countries where there's been large development of renewable energy, advocates are looking to gas-fired stations to provide the flexibility to fill in to deal with the variability from solar power and wind power. And I think the issue here is I think that we need to take a long-term perspective. Back in 1979, the International Energy Agency developed a set of core principles. It was a very short list. And one of those lists was to ban the use of natural gas for power generation. My point of mentioning this is that policy has been going back and forth on, particularly on natural gas over the years. So if we are looking to natural gas to help deal with the swings of output from variable renewable energy sources, what guarantee do investors have that we're not going to see a change in policy again and lead to stranded gas-fired assets?
Well, that's a good question, and you're referring to a position taken in the 79. One thing is sure, renewables have to be coupled with another source of energy. Ideally, as we have where I come from, Quebec, Canada, we have wind energy coupled with hydro, renewable coupled with hydro. But that's not available for many countries. The next solution is to couple it with fossil fuels. If you compare coal to gas, your best option is gas. And we also have seen that business decision makers take the cheapest option, gas being cheap, certainly in some parts of the world, referring here to the States. I think it is the best option, and coal is cheaper than gas in Germany. So to take that example, so I still think that gas is the best environmental option to complement renewables. What's the life cycle of a gas plant? 30, 35? Will we see storage deployed and implemented on that term? It could be discovered. Will it be deployed? Will it be competitive? I think that they can safely invest in gas thermal plants, at least for the next, until 2050 or so.
Well, thank you very much for that. I think certainly the mix of fuels which go together as adversaries, friends or foe, is really kind of open again for discussion. I mean, and there is a real question mark about whether gas will knock out renewables, in some situations. We hope not, but if the price goes down, that's, always an issue.
Yeah, but I don't think so. I think that renewables are really, that's what we see around the world, are there to stay. The costs are coming down, the pressure coming in from an improvement in our environment is there to stay also. The big question mark is how fast will we go along the route of developing storage that will enable suppliers to to complement renewables with another source that would not be coal or gas.
And I think you mentioned, finally, it's a nice segue to the next session that you will have. Really, the challenges are, how do we live in a modern urban environment that has the new kind of infrastructure, which is very different from a centralized structure which relied essentially on big power stations, whether they were fueled by gas or coal. And if we have modern cities, modern urban environments that are essentially generating a large amount of their own energy, food, water needs themselves, maybe the infrastructure is very different and the storage needs are very different, and the solutions that I hope Sir David, through his Apollo project, if it succeeds, will find it will be very, very different. I want to just say thank you very, very much to Marie
Thank you to you.
Jose
Thank you for your
coming
attention.
here. And I hope you catch your flight on time. I know
Yes.
that you have to go. And see you all after the coffee break.
Thank you.
Super. Thank you.